like Dre said, not a performer. If you'll even notice, I was telling Heather this when we were here earlier. If you even look at the pictures, I'm drinking tea. Right? That's basically what I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to drink tea in front of all of you. I'm going to read the beginning of a longer piece I'm working on, which is pretty much about the magic, good and bad, mostly bad in some ways, about being 10 years old. My big terror at age 10. A nuclear bomb would fall at any moment. We would be vaporized instantly. My mother disappearing into the neon bright air as she stood at the cutting board in our kitchen, knife poised over glistening slabs of raw meat, while at the kitchen table I drew pictures of gowns, off the shoulder, sequin, turquoise, I wanted to wear when I grew up. My father dissolved at his desk in the study where he lived, vanished for good into the yellow paths spread before him, full of the history of the country he loved and lost, mapped and remapped in his small, scrawling handwriting. Upstairs in her bedroom, my sister Peggy, thick hair falling in greasy clumps over her sullen face, was instantly gone, along with the voice of John Lennon coming from her cassette player. Imagine there's no heaven, swallowed up in the roar of radiation. Then there were the smaller, no less disturbing terrors of the quotidian. Would Johnny Elfman chase me around the playground, shouting fake Chinese at me while my breath became ragged and my eyes stung? My friend Louise already had a patch of dark hair growing between her legs that she tried unsuccessfully to hide while changing in the locker room. I inspected myself carefully at night in the bath, waiting and wondering. When it came, would it be an eruption, like a forest springing overnight, dense and wild? I worried about the ants in the house that never seemed to go away, the ones that I killed and left under the TV, and the other ants who found their dead and carried them carefully, lovingly away. Where do they hide their bodies? Would they attack me one day for killing them? And Aaron Goldberg had killed himself between Thanksgiving and Christmas. He sat in the shiny gold car his parents bought for him for being college valedictorian, engine running in the sealed garage, his hands on the knob of the radio. Was he angry we passed by the house right when he was dying? My mother slowed the car and wondered aloud about the light left on in the garage. That's funny, the Goldbergs are in the Bahamas, before she drove a few houses down to our home. Peggy told me that there were many ways to do it, this thing called suicide. Aaron poisoned himself with a bad gas from the car. That's the smart way to do it. It doesn't hurt. It's peaceful. You just go to sleep. He was listening to the radio when he died. My mother claimed he looked happy. This was how she knew he was insane, because he had a smile on his face, fingers on the knob of the radio, lungs filling with poison. My mother and I liked to sing in the car, bags of groceries piled on the floor and seat around us. On the day that Aaron killed himself, we had bought Wonder Bread, margarine, Skippy peanut butter, and steaks, bloody and red behind the plastic. Later, my mother would make an American dinner with the steak and the potatoes that grew eyes in the dark of our cabinet. We often sang our favorite Doris Day song, Que Sera Sera. I tried to remember if we'd been singing when we drove by his house. What song had been playing on our radio? Had we been listening to the same song as him when he was dying? You could also slash your wrists, Peggy told me. She drew the edge of her hand across the air above her wrist. Your veins open up and all your blood comes out. This horrified me. I was afraid that in a moment of carelessness, I would accidentally slice my wrists on the rough edge of a table while drawing or eating. It seemed really easy to do. My mother always told me I was careless and clumsy. Broken plates, spills, scrapes proved her point. At meals, I started sitting with my chair pulled away from the table, gingerly approaching my plate, slow, stilted movements to ensure my wrist didn't make contact with the edge of the table. My mother thought I was working to improve my table manners. I cannot teach you how to eat properly at the table the way the Americans do with their forks and knives and spoons. You just have to watch how they do it. She shook her head sorrowfully. I have failed you as a mother. You are not properly prepared for the world. She sighed. I dreaded her sighs. They permeated the entire house, a thick and stifling fog sucking out cool, clean air. I'd find bits and pieces of her sighs hours later, like in a corner of the kitchen when she abruptly launched into a passionate speech. Do you know your aunt told me she wants to come to America? She wants to live here and have the good life, she says. Can you imagine that? She wouldn't last a day. She thinks it's like those silly TV shows where the women lounge in big houses with pools wearing dresses and diamonds and don't do any work. She doesn't know what my day is like, what I do every day. I'm almost like a peasant here. Most people do not really know or understand, but you understand, don't you? Surely I couldn't tell her any of my fears, lest I was branded ill-mannered and... This was deliberate to build suspense. Lest I was branded ill-mannered and insane, and she an utter failure at motherhood. I couldn't tell her that I pictured Aaron's ghost in my closet, nestled somewhere between my favorite ruffled blouses that no one else at school wore. Aaron waited for me to fall asleep, and he emerged then with dark, bloody holes in the places where he once had eyes. Eyes that rotted away because he had done a terrible thing and didn't deserve to see. In my bed, I could feel his invisible, bony and cold fingers grazing my face. But what was even more terrifying was how much I wanted to insult him, to call him names and curse him. He had brought suffering to his parents, although maybe they deserved it. They were on vacation when their own son was in trouble, my mother exclaimed over and over after it happened. Each night I closed the door to the closet where Aaron lurked, knowing, even as I did it, that it was a futile gesture. How could a slab of wood stop a vengeful ghost who, when alive, had done this terrifying thing called suicide? He could hear my terrible thoughts, and he wanted to snatch me away from my bedroom with the matching white desk and chest of drawers with gold trim, the blue curtains with clouds on them, my shelf full of my favorite books about girls at a boarding school in England. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open and fixed on the closet where Aaron Goldberg's ghost lurked, unable to control my thoughts, hurling insults at him. I had many more stomach aches than usual, and I wondered if it was because of Aaron. Later that year, my grandfather, my yaya, died while we were visiting my mother's relatives in Taiwan for the summer. Ba cried. Peggy's eyes were wide with pleasure and fear as she described how our father made loud sounds, his body shaking when he learned that our grandfather had died of a heart attack in the shower. I was disappointed I missed it. I had been learning how to squat and pee over the hole with its sharp, unpleasant smells in the bathroom at the summer school in Taiwan my mother made me attend. I was far more fascinated with this hole in the bathroom. Chinese lessons consisted of having endless conversations about going to the market or taking a trip to a house by a lake or beautiful spring days in a garden. I also had to write characters over and over, trying to embed in my brain the correct order of each stroke, all while knowing I wouldn't remember any of it. I imagined the words I had to write falling into the hole in the ground where I pissed during the day. While doing all these things, I missed the alien act of my father weeping. I had seen my mother cry many times at the kitchen table, hunched over a pale green mug of tea, or in the car, her hands clutching the steering wheel, and sometimes standing with her back to me, her shoulders shuddering while I writhed on the floor, maybe possessed by demonic spirits. Weeping was what my mother did, but my father, he didn't weep. He wrote. Clean, clear lines of small black writing that rose and fell on endless sheets of paper, lines I couldn't read no matter how many times my mother made me attend that school. But this thing called death, my grandfather dead in the shower, my father sobbing, it didn't fit. A careless smudge across one of the sheets of paper on his desk. I remembered my yaya as a mostly silent man with a large belly, hands often crossed behind his back, small eyes nearly obscured by puffy folds of flesh in his face, and thick eyebrows with hairs that jutted straight out from his brow in a menacing fashion. He asked me the same 3 questions each time he visited. How is school? How old are you now? Are you Chinese or American? I was glad I wouldn't have to answer those questions anymore, and I felt guilty for being glad about it when he was dead. My best friend Gloria and I spent most of our free time in 5th grade with our ear pressed against the red cardboard pencil case I'd been given that summer in Taiwan. It had gold leaves printed on it, and we declared it the Holy Box. We knew that inside the Holy Box resided the spirits of Gloria's friend Samantha, who had died 2 years ago because her blood was bad, and now my grandfather. I listened closely to the Holy Box, my heart racing wildly each time I held it up against my ear. I reported to Gloria in a hoarse whisper, "Yes, I hear their footsteps." Tap, 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 tap. The minute I heard their footsteps, I held the box as far away from me as possible, afraid the spirits would enter my ear and slip into my brain, crawling around my thoughts and dreams like a row of ants that I crushed, one by one, while watching cartoons Saturday morning, my hands sticky and dusty with sugar from the donuts that squirted jelly, cold and tangy, in my mouth. When we weren't listening for the spirits of my grandfather and Samantha, Gloria and I played a game called Police Officer Rape. One of us, usually me, played a pregnant housewife who encounters a dog when she goes grocery shopping. When the pregnant housewife is in the dairy section getting milk, the man attacks, waving a gun, the neon green water gun we took from her younger brother, Gloria's younger brother, demanding money from the supermarket and all the customers. I always managed to escape the grocery store, run out into the street, and find a conveniently stationed police officer. Gloria played both the roles of the thief and the policeman. Police, help me, police, I've been robbed. Oh, my baby. What is the problem, lady? Gloria adopted a throaty, deep voice that resembled that of Regan when she was possessed by the devil in The Exorcist. As a police officer, she never helped save my unborn child or me. Instead, after I wailed about my unborn child and being robbed, she pointed the same gun at me, led me away to a field, and abruptly shoved me down on the ground. I'm pregnant, please don't hurt my baby, I pleaded. You are nothing but a slut. No matter how often we played this game, I felt a sharp, hot slap of that word, and the others she used, like bitch or whore. Gloria got on top of me and began vigorously grinding her pelvis against mine while grunting. This is what my parents sound like sometimes in the middle of the night. Before she made those pained guttural noises. I only heard those noises coming from the bathroom when my father strained to move his bowels each night. A stack of books set on the floor in front of him to get through this seemingly impossible task. Sometimes I giggled when she lay on top of me, pinning me down with her wiry arms, making those sounds and rubbing her pelvis against mine. The grass tickled my calves, and I felt an electric and heavy sensation between my legs. I giggled because it felt unbearably thrilling. My delight coated in the same heavy shame and fear that marked my other rituals with Aaron and my grandfather. The scene ended with her pulling me roughly up to my feet and placing me under arrest, holding my wrists together, squeezing them tightly. We didn't tell anyone else about this game or the Holy Box. My family went on a trip during spring vacation that year to Paris. One of the first things we did was see the Mona Lisa, which my mother said was the most famous painting in the world. I was unimpressed. She looked like she could be a teacher at my school with her severe middle part and straight hair framing a plain face, all around dull, ugly brown colors. Her eyes are said to follow you wherever you go, Peggy told me. I stepped back, keeping my eye on hers. What did she see? I tried to imagine myself wearing my favorite purple knickers, a white blouse with ruffles, a straw hat from Singapore. Could she see beneath and through me like an x-ray into my head filled with terrible thoughts toward dead people, the curses at Aaron Goldberg and my yaya? Did she see me playing police officer rape with Gloria? And more recently, pressing a tennis ball and a tomato-shaped pincushion between my legs to try to produce that same electric sensation from when Gloria ground against me? On one of the last days, we visited Notre Dame Cathedral. We never went to church. We had no religion, but this church was special, according to Peggy. It's the most beautiful place in the world. I marched to the front of the overbearing grandness, looked up at the vaulted ceiling, and whispered, "Fuck you, God." The gargoyles in the cathedral menaced me with white eyes, raised claws, and hungry mouths. I looked at the gargoyles, thrilled that no one, at least no one human, not even my mother, knew what I had done. Later, on the plane ride home, I developed sharp pains in my stomach. Up in the air, near the clouds where God must live, I was being punished at last. It was just as my mother liked to say, life is not fair, but somewhere down the road, bad people always get what they deserve. I pictured God extending a pale finger like a sword toward the flesh of my sinful belly, soft with buttery croissants. When the airplane landed and I made it on the ground, alive, my terror of God didn't diminish. I felt his power. It was a warning. I remembered the Mona Lisa's eyes. Pay attention, little girl, for I'm watching you. But just as I wanted to think bad thoughts about Aaron Goldberg, now I wanted to do it again and curse God, hurl insults, keep calling him names. I stayed awake for hours at night, my mind bubbling with an inexplicable and urgent desire to insult this almighty God. To save myself, when the urge to insult God became too great and I couldn't hold back by doing multiplication tables or singing songs from The Sound of Music, I substituted his name with the letter F. Fuck you, X. X is an asshole. I hate X. I remembered the woman I saw on the side of the road in Taiwan one summer. Toothless, her face tan and wrinkled like a chestnut. She suddenly began shouting and spitting at my mother. She is insane, my mother explained to me. That means she cannot control herself. She has lost all control. I worried I would end up like her, that one day someone would point to me and say, she has lost all control. Thank you.
I think we're going to change the name of the show to Fuck You, God.
Yes.